morning and welcome to the Sustainability Webinar Series. Thank you for joining us on this very, very cold day. What better thing to do than join us for this presentation. First of all, my name is Carrie-Ann Kohler-Monroe and I host the Sustainability Webinar Series. If you haven't attended one in the past, there is a link in your invite to the recorded past webinars that you can view. This one will also be posted on that YouTube site as well. So check out the link. As far as today, we're going to have Laura Ung moderate the session and a presentation by John Jamieson. And then there will be some question and answers. So I'd invite everybody to put your questions in the question box throughout the presentation, and they'll be asked to John at the end of the presentation. And I'd also ask you to do a survey at the end. There's just a few short questions if you wouldn't mind. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Laura Ung. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie-Ann. As Laura said, my name is Laura Ung. I'm an evaluation specialist with the Natural Resource Management branch. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that you have a hot cup of coffee or tea and you're ready to hear about Albertans' perspectives on agriculture and the food system. The Canadian Centre for Food Integrity presenters are going to be introducing themselves, but right now I'd like to take a quick opportunity to highlight how agriculture and forestry has been engaging and supporting the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity and their public trust research in Alberta and Canada. So agriculture and forestry is a founding member of the CCFI, and we've been supporting them since 2016. Shortly, you will hear about the 2020 Alberta research results. And in addition to this, in 2016 and 2018, we supported additional Alberta respondents in their surveys to increase the number of Alberta respondents in their surveys. And this increases the confidence in our provincial level reporting. So this means we have 3 years of good data on how Albertans perceive agriculture and their levels of trust in agriculture and the food system. If you're interested in any of these reports from 2016 all the way till now in 2020, please just contact me. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to John from the CCFI to introduce their organization and deliver the presentation. Thank you very much. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Carrie-Ann. As Laura and Carrie-Ann both mentioned, we have a great relationship with the department in Alberta and really appreciate the support. We also like the idea or the ability to increase the sample size in Alberta because it gives you, the industry there, the data and the confidence of what you need in order to help connect with the consumer. Because really what we're trying to do is grow the industry, and we need to do that by having the consumer accept the food that we're producing, but also accept and trust the processes and practices that are involved in producing that. So that's what I'll do. Again, my name is John Jamieson. I'm the president and CEO of the Centre for Food Integrity. I've been here a little over a year and a half. Prior to that, I worked in government in Prince Edward Island. And actually, I'm coming to you from Prince Edward Island today. Our office is in Guelph, and I came home in Christmas time. And with the lockdown down in Ontario, I've just continued to work from here, but we'll be heading back to Ontario, I expect, at some point fairly soon. So I'm actually going to share my screen, and then we'll go into the presentation of the deck. So hopefully you're seeing my full screen. Title of the presentation today is Growing the Trust Relationship in Agriculture and Food in Alberta. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit as we set up the discussion on the research of some of you may not be as familiar with CCFI as certainly the folks in the department is, but we're a relatively new organization. We were established in 2016. And we were really founded to lead a united effort to advance public trust in Canada. And one of the things that was identified a couple of years ago by the Public Trust Steering Committee, when they looked at, how to connect with the consumer, and they talked about one of the things that we really needed someone to lead that united effort, and that's what this organization does. And we're unique in that we have broad support from all across the sector. So our membership, and I'll show you in a second, involves industry people, but also government and others. And we think this is a uniquely Canadian approach to dealing with public trust. In other countries that I'm familiar with, it's mostly a sector by sector approach, whereas where we're trying to do it as an overall system. And we have a very good board. Actually, our chair, Kim McConnell, comes from in Calgary, from Alberta. We have other members of the board from Western Canada, and many of them that are connected to your industry in Alberta. This, again, just gives you an idea of the broad support of our organization, and that we have corporate members of people in the food industry, many of our governments and departments of agriculture across Canada. We have representation from commodity groups and farm organizations, and we also have a close relationship with academia and what we call the amplifier organizations, such as 4-H Canada, Ag in the Classroom Canada, and the Farm and Food Care Organization. So again, we're unique in that our support is broad-based, and that provides us with a level of support that and the ability to be neutral in the food system. And when we talk about the opportunity facing the agri-food system, we look back at the Barton report from a couple of years ago, and I think there's even a stronger opportunity as a result of COVID than there may have been in the past. But Dominic Barton reported that agri-food will be one of the most important sectors in the world over the next 20 years. And Canada has all the right ingredients to be a global leader in safe, nutritional, and sustainable food. And that the opportunity is not only in feeding Canadians and making sure we have that food security, but also in continuing to be one of the leading exporters in the world and having the ability to grow the sector. And when we think about what are the most important ingredients for growth in the food sector, is it access to water? And we know that in California, that is an issue right now. I have friends that farm in California, and they're actually the largest blueberry growers in the U.S. And they're telling me that they think they have about 10 good years, or 10 years actually left of production there. So is it water? Is it innovation? Is it technology or access to capital? I would say that the scarcest and most precious ingredient for growth in the food sector is having that trust of the public and allowing the industry to innovate, to the use of modern technologies. I read an article this morning, and it was a study that was in Italy, and they looked at GMOs, and they asked the representative sample of Italians, do you feel that GMOs are safe to eat? And I think the number was around 52% of Italians said, yeah, we think that GMOs are safe to eat. So then they also asked the scientific community the same question. And in the scientific community, there was almost 100% agreement that GMOs are safe to eat. So you see that gap between what the public believes and what the science believes. So, when we think about having science on our side, that's really important, but there's so much more to being able to grow the food sector, and we need to have that trust. So that's what we do, and that's what we help government and our industry partners try to get that trust in a number of ways. And when we think about the areas of focus that the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity has, we're not just about research. We do other things, and one of them is that coordination, trust, leadership. We are also starting to advance our direct-to-consumer communications. And again, we have the research that we're going to chat about a little later on that provides the data that allows you to do your job. So when we think about coordination, we're a neutral third party that brings a coordinated approach to an issue. And one of the items that we've just started to work on, it's actually suggested by an organization based in Alberta, is that, can we have a coordinated approach to understanding and working with animal activism in Canada? So what we do there is we've organized monitoring services for a number of farm organizations in Canada. So we provide, what's happening in the animal activism arena. But more importantly, what we will be doing is bringing the livestock sector together to talk about activities around animal activism. What are the things that we need to think about? Who are the key players? What are some knowledge and some sharing that we can do? And we do that. We're starting to bring communications professionals together. We have already been bringing the national amplifier organizations together, again, to share that knowledge and to help with that coordinated approach to building public trust. We also offer a number of resources and webinars. Our website has research and other resources that are available to you. And we also have a monthly webinar that dives into a particular issue. The next one we'll be hosting is on February 18th, where we have an Indigenous Canadian and a broadcaster, Jesse Wente. We'll talk about building equity, diversity, and inclusion in the food system. And following Jesse's presentation, we'll have a number of panel members from government, industry, farm organizations that will talk about what they're doing to advance EDI. So I think that'll be a wonderful webinar, and I'd encourage you to look at it on the 18th of February. Another thing that we do is we host an annual summit where we bring industry together and again talk about knowledge sharing and opportunities on how we can work together as a system to connect with the consumer. And then last year, with Canadians being increasingly interested in communications and in the food system, we launched a program called It's Good Canada, C'est Bon Canada, which is a food system-wide proactive and reactive communications plan. And we did that to leverage social media, and we leverage that with our partners and other earned media. We try to align with other communications campaigns that are out there. And our key message areas are jobs in the economy, climate change, food affordability, science and technology, food safety and health, trade and exports. And again, these message areas very much align with the data that we get from our research that says, these are the things that the Canadian public is interested in. The plan is gaining traction. We are gaining more industry endorsement all the time. We have MOUs in place with a variety of organizations for creating and sharing that content. And we have different content. So we have a series of interviews on our website, itsgoodcanada.ca. So there's 16 interviews with, thought leaders from the food industry across Canada. We have farmers and scientists shooting self-shot videos. We have some professionally produced video. And, some of the things that we're working toward is influencer videos that involve people from outside of the system, but have a strong following. And looking at things like food affordability and food availability. We're starting to create some infographics, again, that are nice snapshots that are directed toward the consumer that talk about our food system. We are responding to consumer questions and starting to publish op-eds across the system. And, we're doing some media buys, and you need to do that in order to get it in front of Canadians. As I mentioned, C'est Bon Canada, it is bilingual, and we do try to encourage EDI throughout the campaign. So what we're seeing is that consumers and the industry are invested in the food system, and they want more transparency. They are looking for greater proactive and reactive communications that are targeting the consumer. And we also think that people want to look at a national focus when we think about the food system. And again, as I mentioned, we want to bring new voices into the food system. People like the lady in the photo here, her name is Sabrina. She's a young journalist from Toronto, and she and two friends have a YouTube channel. They have 324,000 YouTube subscribers, and their videos have millions and millions of views. So if you're on YouTube, you should check this young lady out. Very engaging. And for example, she did a video for Health Canada. And the video with Health Canada was about vaping, and it had almost no, well, it actually had no paid social to promote it. But that video had over 2 million views. So this is the type of person that we need, and this is who CCFI tends to engage to start talking about our food system, that have this strong following, that's very comfortable speaking to the consumer. And in fact, speaks well to millennials, Gen X, and the younger group. Those are the types of people that we need to start bringing into talking about our food system and using the channels that they have available to them. And we also are going to be focusing more in the years to come on earned media is the key to success. So when we start to think about our research report that the government in Alberta so graciously supported, the title of our report this year is Trends in Trust and the Path Forward. And when we look at the methodology, we went into the field on the public trust opinion survey, which is what I'm going to talk about today, in late July, to the end of August. We surveyed 2,903 Canadians, and in that sampling was 625 Albertans. And we interviewed people that were 18 and older. And we actually use Ipsos to deliver and help develop the survey in conjunction with our research coordinator and the research committee that we have in place. And with the number of people that we have in this year's survey, our results are accurate to within, plus or minus 2.1 percentage points. So the accuracy is very strong in the data that I'm going to show you. And again, our objectives are to track public opinion about Canadian food, agriculture, and the food system, to measure trust around who food system stakeholders, who they want to hear from and how much they trust them, to help understand the food issues Canadians are interested in, and get a better sense of some of the emerging issues that are out there. In our report that's available on our website, we also have two other reports that are of interest that I'm not going to speak to today, but are there. We did a public trust performance measurement where we interviewed and surveyed industry players to look at how they're doing and what the work they're doing to connect with the consumer and build public trust. And we also have an evergreen library of public trust research that is in this year's report and that we continue to add to. And of the 625 Albertans, this is a bit of a snapshot of the demographics of the people that we've connected with. So Ipsos does a really good job of making sure that we have the right gender mix. And in fact, in Alberta, we had exactly a 50-50% split between males and females. We had a nice mix of the different generations that fit Canadian society. We know now that the millennials are the largest group that we have, and that is the largest group that we survey both in Alberta and across Canada. But we also had a strong representation from Gen X, Boomers, people that were 76 and older, and Gen Z. We also asked people about their household income, and the majority of them that we interviewed in Alberta had household income of 100,000 or more, and the majority of them had a university undergraduate degree. The household income and the education are important because what we see when we break down our data is that people that have a lower household income or a lower educational level tend to be less trusting of the food system and more worried about the technologies that we use. So that, you know, it is important to capture that information. So now we're going to get into the meat of the order. So we're going to ask about the key issues within Canada or Alberta's food system. So one of the questions that we've asked over the past 5 years, and it's a foundational question, and we ask Canadians and Albertans, you know, is the food system headed in the right direction? And one of the things that we saw this year in 2020, or last year over 2019, was a significant increase in Canadians that feel the food system is heading in the right direction. It was a 12-point increase over 2019. And in Alberta, 45% of people say they're heading in the right direction. 39% are saying, you know, we're not really sure. And only 16% feel that the food system is heading in the wrong track. One of the reasons I think we've seen that increase in people that think the food system is heading in the right direction is due to the pandemic and the fact that, you know, while the experience continues to be different than certainly what it was before last March, especially when we go to a grocery store and you have to line up and follow the arrows and all that kind of stuff. By and large, the food system has done a very good job of making sure that food continues to be available to Canadians. So, you know, the experience going into the store is different, but once you get in there, the shelves are still stocked. The industry has been able to, you know, ensure the safety of its employees and have, you know, had to make changes and adjustments. And I think that's reflected in the numbers. The challenge will be, how do we continue to you know, keep these numbers growing and moving forward? We also asked, you know, what are the top 5 issues that you have in your life? And in Canada, over the last number of years, the cost of food, the safety of the food imported from outside of Canada, keeping healthy food available have been, you know, top of mind issues with Canadians. We don't ask this as an open-ended question. We do offer, I think it's like 25 different issues, everything from healthcare and personal finances to whatever that people can select from. The difference that you're seeing in Alberta that's significantly different than the rest of Canada is that there's the number one issue that Albertans have selected is the Canadian economy, with 62% identifying that as their main issue. And then to a lesser degree, you know, the federal deficit and the cost of food are the top 3 issues that Albertans are seeing. So there's, you know, what we're seeing is concern around the economy in Alberta, which is not unsurprising. And but it also creates an opportunity for the industry in Alberta to talk about, you know, as we mentioned, the opportunity for the agri-food system to help lead that recovery and growth. Other food system issues that we ask about that are related to farming and food is food safety, food loss and waste, nutritious value of food, humane treatment of animals, environmental sustainability, and the availability of quality food. And you see on the bottom the numbers from Alberta. They're consistently lower than the numbers across Canada. So, you know, what we can, you know, we'll get into this a bit more later on, but by and large, there's pretty strong support for the agri-food industry in Alberta, and less concern about issues than people in other parts of Canada. So, you know, when you look at food safety, for example, Albertans are a full 10 points less than the average in Canada. Food loss and waste, another 6 points. Nutritious value of food, we're pretty much on par. Humane treatment of animals, you're seeing about a 6% decrease, significant decrease in environmental sustainability and the availability of food. And this is a busy slide. Now, the deck that I'm presenting will be available to you and can be sent out by Laura and Carrie Ann. But this just summarizes the 3 top concerns by province. And what you're seeing, again, in Alberta is a real focus on the economy, the deficit, and the cost of food, whereas you have, some slightly different concerns across Canada, but, fairly consistent around the cost of food and, fairly consistent around the Canadian economy. This year, with COVID-19, we wanted to make sure that we had some questions in around there. What we're seeing here, both in Alberta and across Canada, is some very strong confidence that the Canadian food supply will continue to keep fresh food, including meat, dairy, and produce, available to all Canadians. So, 63% have a, agreement with that, but another 24% have very strong agreement, and with only, 13% of Canadians thinking that the food system will not continue to pivot and do what it needs to do. There is some concern around food safety, and again, I think it's because it's a new issue that we're dealing with. But again, some people have somewhat to strongly agree that they're concerned about the safety of food that they're purchasing at restaurants, and less so at grocery stores. What we are seeing across Canada, and again in Alberta, and you see the Alberta numbers are slightly higher than Canada, is that there's fairly strong agreement that people have less money available to spend on food today than they had prior to the pandemic. And again, that's not unsurprising given the impact that COVID-19 has had on the Canadian economy. Our next section is where we're going to talk about, we track a number of questions over time to see what Canadians and Albertans are thinking about. And one of the things that we ask them is that, overall, who do you trust? And we provide them with a list of farmers, university researchers, Canadian ag overall, the food system, grocery stores, restaurants, government agencies, food processors, and politicians. These numbers from Alberta, and these are folks that rate the trust level on an 8 of 10, or 8 or higher out of 10. You see very strong support for farmers in Alberta, with 48% having that high level of trust, and it correspondingly a strong number that that are neutral, and very few Albertans that actually have a low level of trust of the industry. Across the other sectors, there's a little less trust for university researchers. Canadian ag overall, we're higher than the national average, and then the other numbers are pretty consistent, except there's a stronger trust level for grocery stores. But by and large, if you're in the food system in Alberta, there's some, again, very strong support for ag overall and farmers, and you need to think about that as you're presenting your messaging and to the consumer. And these are just some comparison to other provinces. The Canadian average of your overall impression of Canadian ag is 34%. Alberta's at 37%, and some other provinces, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, are significantly higher, but Albertans again have that strong feeling toward ag, as do most Canadians. And then we also ask them when it comes to providing information about food, again, Albertans and Canadians overwhelmingly trust information that is presented by the farm community. And again, in Alberta, 45% respondents said, what we want to hear, we trust what we hear from farmers when they're providing information. Also trust scientific academic researchers, and then less so for food processors and some other areas. When you see lower numbers for restaurants, food processors, advocacy groups, and the like, it doesn't necessarily mean that the consumer doesn't trust what comes from these organizations. They just seem to have so much more trust for for farmers and academic researchers. And again, when you're providing information about food safety, again, Albertans overwhelmingly support information that comes from farmer and trusted. And they also have, good trust for federal government food inspection. Now, in food inspection, they wouldn't necessarily, what we're seeing is the consumer doesn't necessarily differentiate between federal or provincial inspection, but they do have a, fairly strong level of trust. A little less so in Alberta than the national average. And then by and large, the other numbers are pretty much in line with what we're seeing across Canada. So the next area we asked them, what issues are Canadians and Albertans engaged with in the food system? And so this year what we asked folks is, if you've done a search on information in the food system, what are the topics that you've searched for? And overwhelmingly, we see people searching for information on nutrition and healthy eating. And almost 70% of Albertans noted that is an area that they've done a Google search on, or that they've sought out. And what that does for the industry, knowing that Albertans and Canadians are looking for information on nutrition and healthy eating, it also opens the ability to talk about the way that the food is produced and the processes that are involved in it. 42% of Canadians have searched for food safety information, and that number is very consistent with what we're seeing in Alberta. 33% of Albertans looked at environmentally friendly or sustainable food production. 34% around close to the national average on plant-based meat alternatives, but the national average on humane treatment of animals, and again, labor and human rights in food production. The labor and human rights one is one that we saw increase in 2020 over other years. It wouldn't have been included in the top 6 in this year's, and I think part of that is with some of the media information around temporary foreign workers that we saw during the pandemic. And then, so where are Canadians going? This is a really busy slide, but it boils down to a couple of things. When Canadians are looking for information on any of the 6 topics that I just mentioned, they're mostly doing Google searches or going to websites. While they do take in information from social media, from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the like, they don't necessarily go to those sources when they're seeking information. So when they're seeking information, Google search is an important piece, as is having the websites. So that ties in the fact that we need to think about putting our information where people are looking, and also to spend some time thinking about search engine optimization. So do you have the right keywords, phrases, pieces in place that when someone does a Google search, that your website is coming to the top? We also see that when it comes to social media, most people use Facebook, Instagram, lesser amounts use Twitter and LinkedIn. So, a lot of time the food industry tends to put a lot of information out on Twitter. We tend to be just talking to ourselves in that case, and that the very few Canadians actually are engaged in Twitter to the level that the food industry is in. So again, we need to think about, putting our information where people are looking and making sure that we have the right keywords. A little later on this spring, we'll be actually offering a webinar on search engine optimization. So stay in touch. It'll likely be sometime in April or early May. Now, the next section I'm going to talk about is some of the attitude tracking that we've done over time. So this is the 5th year of CCFI survey. So there's certain topics that we've that we've tracked over time to see if there's a change in public attitude on these, and I'll speak to these in a few moments. So we look at crop production. One of the things that we've asked Canadians and Albertans are you personally concerned about the use of pesticides in crop production? And in Alberta, 34% of Albertans had an 8 to 10 or strong agreement with that statement, but that's a full 10 points lower than what we see in the rest of Canada. And again, I think it's, it's that what we're seeing here is that the willingness to trust what the food system in Alberta is doing. You have 57%, a little higher on the moderate side, and only 9% that have a low level, that basically accept what we're doing. So you only have a small number of people in Alberta that are concerned about the use of pesticides compared to the sample of people who are, moderate or have a low level of concern. And then one of the things that we've been tracking over the last number of years, and we see this, pretty well stagnant over the surveys, is that the statement, food grown organically is more healthful than conventionally grown food. And only 23% of Albertans, again, lower than the national average, would have a strong level of agreement with that, with the majority of people having, moderate or low level of agreement. When we dig into these numbers on both the pesticides and organics, what we see is that people with lower levels of income, and actually I think I have that on the next slide. So we do the demographic breakdown on these. In terms of pesticides, what we're seeing is that it's more often females that are concerned about the use of pesticides in crop production, and people 55 and older. And again, people that have that lower household income are the primary shopper or single that if we dive into the demographics. Now, the people that tend to think that food grown organically is more healthy or agree with this statement tend to be female. They're often younger people, Gen Z, millennials, or Gen X's, that have again, that lower level of household income and are the primary shoppers, and are often single people. And in the next statement, we asked folks about, are you personally concerned about eating food that comes from genetically engineered crops? And again, in Alberta, 31% had a strong agreement with that. Again, lower than the national average. And we also had a higher number of people had low level of agreement with that. We also asked, do you think Canadian farmers are good stewards of the environment? 40% of Albertans had agreement with that. The important piece in this one is that only 1% of Albertans actually had a low level of agreement with that. So 99% of Albertans have a strong or moderate agreement with the fact that farmers are good stewards of the environment. And again, if we break down the demographics on that, the folks that would be more concerned about eating food that comes from genetically engineered crops are female, over 35. Residents of Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia are much more concerned about GMOs, and again have that, high school or post-secondary, certainly not a university degree. So the higher level of education or household income, the more comfortable people tend to be with the technologies. And on the statement, Canadian farmers are good stewards of the environment. It's mostly people 55 or older that have good agreement with that. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and PEI have very similar levels to this statement. But in this case, it's also people that have a high school or post-secondary education that have that strong agreement. When we look at antibiotic use, the statement, I am personally concerned about drug residues in meat, milk, and eggs. Again, much lower than the national average. 26% of Albertans have a strong agreement with that. 59% have a moderate, and 15% have a low level. When we asked about drug resistance due to farm animals being given antibiotics, Again, 29% of Albertans, which again is included 6 points less than the national average. 58% of Albertans had a moderate agreement with that, which is close to the national average. And 13% of Albertans had a low level of concern around drug resistance. And then we asked the question, do you believe farm animals should be given antibiotics if they're sick? And 34% of Albertans, very similar to the national average, agree with that statement. 60% have moderate agreement, and another 4% have low agreement. So most people do believe, have a moderate to strong agreement that farm animals should be given antibiotics should they become ill. And then the next statement is, I am personally concerned about the use of antibiotics in farm animals. Again, Alberta, 28%, significantly lower than the national average that have a concern about that. 63% have a moderate, which is, again, it's higher than the national average, and then 12% have a low level of agreement with that statement. And again, on the concern for antibiotics, it tends to be more female, 55 plus, boomer generation, and people who do most or all the grocery shopping in their household. One of the things that I will mention, just as an aside, what we see in Alberta is a tendency for people to tend to do their shopping at one store pretty consistently, and less moving around and following sales that you would necessarily see in the rest of Canada. The next section is on animal welfare, and the statement, Canadian meat is derived from humanely treated animals. 1/3 of Albertans strongly agree with that, and slightly higher than the national average. 64% have a moderate agreement, and only 3% have a low agreement with that statement. If we ask if farm animals are treated decently and humanely, I have no problem consuming meat, milk, and eggs. And again, Albertans have 63% are comfortable with that. 34% have a moderate agreement, and only 3% have a low agreement in this. And again, if I remember the numbers, I think only 1% of Albertans identified themselves as vegan, and I think only another 1% identified as self-identified as vegetarian. It's one of the questions that we do ask is how do you identify your eating habits? And again, if we look at the demographic breakdown, tends to be younger people that have concern for animal welfare, or people with a lower annual income, and again, a high school or post-secondary education, college education, but not university. And these are essentially the questions that we asked, that we just kind of went over, only a breakdown by province. And I won't spend any time on this, but again, this will be available to you following the presentation, and you can look into it. But what you're seeing by and large is stronger support for the food industry in Alberta than perhaps across Canada and in the national average. And again, these are some more of the questions that we had just touched on, only a breakdown by province. One of the sections that we added this year is on sustainable food, and we asked Canadians, how do you define what you think is sustainable? And we offered, a number of suggestions that people could select from. The most popular one being sustainable food being one that has a positive impact on climate change and the environment. 42% of Albertans felt that way, slightly less than the national average of 45%. 33% of Albertans identified sustainable food as food that is grown, locally grown or raised, slightly higher than the national average. And again, almost 30% identified that sustainable food is one that's safe for you and your family, and again, higher than the national average. And you'll see the different numbers across. But basically, what we're seeing is that there's really no strong agreement, other than the environment, on what sustainable food is. and that as the industry continues to define what sustainable food is, we have to think about how we can message different parts to different portions of the population. Then we asked folks, do you actively seek out grocery store items that use less packaging? And 55% of Canadians said that, sometimes or always we try to do that. That number is 52%, 62% for Alberta, which is slightly higher than that national average. And then we also asked you actively seek out items that have a minimal impact. 8% said always, 41% said sometimes. Again, slightly higher than the national average that we're seeing in Alberta. When we're thinking about the future and we look at the data, younger Canadians aged 18 to 23, the Gen Zs, are certainly a driving force behind the consumer demand for environmentally sustainable food. Compared to other Canadians, they're more likely to define sustainable food as one that has sustainable packaging, and they're more likely to seek out food items with less packaging and the ones that have a minimal environmental or label as a minimal environmental impact. They're also more likely to seek out plant-based options than older Canadians. So as this group becomes a bigger and bigger factor, and as they mature into being the primary purchasers of food in the household, we'll have to think about the way that the things that motivate them. We also have a section on food safety and regulation. And we asked the question, do you trust food produced in Canada more than you trust food produced outside of Canada? And 60% of Canadians agree with that statement, certainly lower in Alberta at 53%. And it tells me that Albertans may have a stronger connection with exporting and importing and have that comfort level that maybe some Canadians don't necessarily have. But 53% of Albertans certainly trust food that's produced inside of Canada more than food that's exported or imported. If we look at the food safety system, in 2020, 51% of Canadians said they had a high, and that's again an 8 out of 10 support for the Canadian food safety inspection system, with 44% of Albertans, certainly lower than the national average. And then we also asked folks, do you feel that there's the right amount of regulations in our food system? So 6% or 8% of Albertans feel that there are too many regulations. 32% of Albertans feel that there's not enough. And 59% of Albertans feel that there's just enough. So of the people that identified that the 32% in Alberta that said, not enough regulations, we asked them, well, what areas would you like to see more regulations? And by and large, it's around pesticides and chemicals. And 52% of Albertans said, of the people that said we wanted more regulation, they said we want more around pesticides and chemicals. 35% said more around GMOs. 33% around limiting food waste. 30% on environmental standards, and 22% on food labeling. 27% said meat and food safety, and food safety and produce. So you see the numbers there. So these are the areas that the folks that would like to see more regulation in these topic areas. We also asked questions around affordability and quality, because we know that food affordability and cost of food is top of mind for Canadians. And again, this is a busy slide, but we broke out different components of the food system, and we asked people to rate them as whether they see them as expensive. And 58% of Albertans identified full service restaurants as identified as expensive. 58% said meat at the grocery store. Half said fish and seafood. Overall, 41% of Albertans said, we find that food is expensive. And then as you get into dairy, grains, oil seeds, and pulses, certainly less less thought there that food is expensive. So quickly went through, we sort of selected data. There's a lot more data in the full report that is available to the industry in Alberta. But really, if we look at the key messages, confidence in your food system is at an all-time high. And people are very supportive of the food system and farmers and agriculture in Alberta. And I think that's something that you can build on. The economy is a major concern. So when you're thinking about messaging to the people of Alberta, and actually this may be a little different than the rest of Canada, you need to think about what can the agri-food system in Alberta help to drive economic recovery or drive economic growth. Trust, again, is extremely high for farmers and agriculture. And what we're seeing in Alberta is that, the trends around, plant-based proteins or other ones, there are less importance in Alberta than they are in the rest of Canada. So my takeaways is that, more and more Canadians are confident that the food system and confident that Alberta's food system is heading in the right direction. And this gives us an extraordinary opportunity to connect with consumers and highlight the potential for the agri-food system to lead economic recovery in Alberta. They trust the regulatory system of ensuring food safety. Affordability is still front of mind. Sustainability is more than a buzzword. People are looking for sustainable options around packaging, around environment, and we're seeing that Albertans are interested in seeking out those options in the grocery store. Search engine optimization and working together, leveraging partnerships, I think is the path to success. So what can we do to help you? CCFI can help connect the consumer with the food system in Alberta. We can help advance the sector growth by partnering on strategic communications. We have a platform that we can build on. We can help coordinate actions as we're doing in communications, in animal welfare and in other areas. And it's also important to have that consumer insights that allow the industry to understand what the consumer is thinking. We have to have that data in order to measure where we're going, to figure out what messaging we need to continue with and how we need to drive forward. Because really, at the end of the day, we're all trying to advance the sector and build on it. And that is the remainder of my presentation. I just have to figure out now how to stop sharing. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, more than happy to try to answer them.
Great, thank you, John. Always a ton of information to digest. We do have a handful of questions for you, so I'll just read them out and I'll let you answer. Just a quick clarification question. When it came to the lower incomes and lower levels of education, were they less or more trusting?
Less trusting, certainly less trusting. We see that they were a bit more trusting, I think, in animal welfare, but by and large, the lower the income, the lower the education level, the less trusting they are of GMOs, pesticides, things like that, and that's consistent right across Canada.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question is, have you done any specific research that relates to youth and their levels of public trust in Alberta's food system?
Yeah. So actually what Laura and the staff would have with the department is a full data set. And actually any members of CCFI would also have access to that full data set. So within the full data set, you actually can break the data down much more than I've done here. So you can actually look at, single people under 30 years, it breaks it down every category by age, by income level, by a variety of metrics. So the full data set that we get from Ipsos does do all that breakdown. So I could actually give a presentation on the same questions that we presented here and only target the people, for example, under 30 years old or under 34.
All right, thank you. Yes, and so if you're interested in that level of detail, by all means, contact me. Another question, quickly, does the GMO also include the new breeding technology like CRISPR in the survey, or would that be considered something different?
We asked the question on GMO, so it's up to what the consumer thinks. I think it probably needs something different, and actually this, in the coming year, we're actually probably going to add questions around gene editing and see if we can figure out if the consumer has that separation between GMO and CRISPR and gene editing and some of the other technologies. We do have, I'll just mention, we do have an application into Agriculture Canada. Hopefully that will be successful, and if that's the case, we're actually going to dive into a number of these topics, much deeper than we do in our annual survey. So fingers crossed that we can do a deeper dive into some of these topics.
Yeah, hopefully that would be really quite interesting, especially as it's emerging technology. Okay, next question is there still concern that although confidence is at an all-time high, is there still concern about the myths and misconception in public trust? How do you believe public trust will be impacted in a post-COVID environment? And how much misinformation will infiltrate public trust?
I think misinformation continues to be a big issue for the food industry, which is why we really need to think about how we can have proactive and reactive communication channels, but also ones that where we hear from the consumer and understand what they're thinking. We just started, and I'll give an example. We just started providing information on animal activism in Canada to several organizations, and I started reading through the material. And it's unbelievable how much misinformation just on animal activism is out there in Canada. And when you look at the Facebook posts and you see the hundreds and hundreds of people that are sharing and supporting these posts, to me it's very concerning for the food industry. So while the number continues to grow, that we see people thinking the food system is going in the right direction, they're still being bombarded with so much misinformation that we have to think about how we package that in ways that's engaging and help them understand, the nuances of modern food production. And that's a challenge. I think too, when post-COVID, I think, there are a number of people out there that are skeptical about the pandemic, that are skeptical about vaccines, that are skeptical about a number of things. I think that's a breeding ground for more disinformation. So I think we actually have to ramp our activities up. I think we have to coordinate a little better. And we also have to do it in a way that we talk about the whole food system and don't allow one system to tear down another. And I think that's the struggle that we have with some members of the food system, is that they try to build themselves up by tearing others down. You look at the packaging around the no GMO products, where you see stuff labeled as no GMO, and there isn't possibly a GMO alternative. So I'm on a bit of a rant, Laura, but by and large, we need to continue to ramp up our activities, really need to continue to work together and speak to the consumer in ways that are engaging. And like I said, that the young lady that has a channel in the YouTube channel, we need to have people like that telling our story and connecting with people that we might not necessarily be able to. So I'm not sure I've answered the question, but I think just on the animal welfare stuff that I've seen over the last couple of weeks, it's astounding the misinformation that's in.
Yeah.
And the manipulation of people's feelings.
Mm-hmm. It's challenging. Okay, I realize it is 10 o'clock. We do have 2 more questions in the queue. So I understand if participants are required to exit, but if you're willing to stick around for a few more minutes, we will get to those 2 questions. Is that all right with you, John?
Fine with me.
Okay, great.
It's afternoon here where I am.
Oh, that's true. Maybe your stomach's growling. Okay, so the next question is, how do we respond to the task that we as producers in producing affordable food when our consumers continually ask for improvements in sustainability, less use or animal performance products, the carbon tax? It's getting very difficult to respond to everyone's concerns. So I think this sort of builds into a little bit of the answer that you provided to the previous question.
It is, and you know, Canadians don't quite understand that we have among the lowest food costs in the world, actually second next to the US. And, you know, they may have gone up a little bit this year, but you know, typically we only have about 9 to 10% of our income is spent on food, where if you think about Europeans or others who are in the teens, a lot of parts of the world just want to eat, and 40 to 50% of their income can be spent on food. The challenge for the food system is, because we spend so little of our income in Canada on food, we can decide, well, we want sustainability, we want this, we want that, and that builds costs into the primary producer that is very hard for them to extract. And so we need to think more about how do we, you know, someone shared an article with me this morning from Ontario, and it was a reporter explaining, you know, about winter wheat and what it was. And I think in this case, they were using it as a plow down to increase, or they're also talking about plow downs to increase organic matter and the like, and carbon sequestration. And, you know, they interviewed a farmer and he said, "This is great, but I still have to run my business. I still have to feed my family. I can't do all this stuff and not expect to be compensated for it." So I don't have any great answer. There's no magic bullet, but we do have to think about how we manage to continue to support primary producers while layering more and more activities on them that are really hard to extract money from the system. And they are a public good. So, you know, when the things that farmers are doing is, you know, in a lot of ways, it is a public good, and the public should be expected to pay for it.
Excellent. Thank you, John. It's when we talked about sustainability and what consumers, how they defined what was sustainability, and we saw that, yeah, the environment was up there, but then it was sort of a mixed bag with some of those other attributes. So, you know, when you're thinking about that three-legged stool, that it's about sustainability, but economics and also social. It's kind of, how do we balance that out a little bit more for consumers and increase their understanding of a very complex system.
It is, yeah. I wasn't surprised at the numbers that I saw. Actually, when I saw the numbers on when you ask people about sustainability and they think about, oh, well, it's about the environment, and only, you know, 20% or something like that realize that it's also the economic piece, where you have to make sure the farmer gets paid, or people get paid for what they do, and then there's also the social responsibility. I think as we're working more and more to define sustainable systems and to communicate to the consumer what a sustainable system is, we really need to focus on that economic and social component of it as well. And you think about, you know, what the food system does and farmers do on the social side of things, and how giving they are. You know, there is lots to identify. So when we're identifying sustainability, we need to think that it's more than just reporting to the consumer about the environmental part.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, we haven't done a very good job of that over.
It's continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Just so you know, the answer of that, or the person that asked that question, appreciated your answer. So the last question for everyone still on the webinar is, what role do you see government playing in building public trust, since there's a low level of trust in politicians? Are they funders for education campaigns, researchers, etc.?
Well, I'll haul my old hat on. I was a deputy minister in government before I came to work with the Center for Food Integrity. And to me, there's several roles government can play. And I think it has to be a funder and a partner to help industry tell its story. I also think that, one of the things that we forget is that government is an important part of the food system in regulation or especially in regulation or in other ways. I think our government needs to do a better job of talking about your regulation. There was a nice statement from CFIA a few years ago on glyphosate. Well, we need to see more of that. And government needs to be a bit more transparent about what they do. So I see them as a partner, a funder for sure. And when I was with the government of Prince Edward Island, actually, before I left, I gave one of the amplifier organizations a 3-year contract to make sure that they had some sustainable funding for a bit. So they have to be a funder, but I also think they have to be a partner. And I like what you're doing in Alberta and working with us, collecting the data and helping use that to formulate, your communication strategy or your policy or your programming, and supporting the sector, and also being able to provide that information. So there's a number of roles that government can play, all of them very important. And but the key, I would think, is making sure that industry and government work together with the same focus.
Agreed, John. Thank you. And again, the person that asked that question said thank you for an excellent answer. So that's all of our questions that we have in the queue. So thank you to everyone that stuck around through those. If you have anything that pops up later today, by all means, you can either contact John, you can contact myself, and we can further continue this very interesting dialogue. And hopefully this is sort of just the start of much more future dialogue. I'm going to hand it over to Carrie Ann just for a quick wrap up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much, you guys, for participating in today's webinar. Thank you, John, for the wealth of information you shared with us. I think a couple points that stood out for myself as I was listening to the webinar today is that there's a CFI is leading a coordinated approach to animal activism in Canada, and kudos to the Alberta industry partners or members who brought that forward. So not surprising, but it's great to see the work that is being done as we learn more about public trust. And also one statement that you said right at the beginning that stayed with me throughout the whole webinar was the most precious ingredient for growth in the food sector is trust. And that's why we're all here today. And yeah, so I'm really going to think about that. And I think we all believe that. It's just how do we get those messages out and how do we build those sustainability strategies? So without further ado, I'll close off today's webinar and just remind everybody that there will be a couple of quick questions at the end of when you sign off as a survey. And this webinar will be posted on the YouTube page that you had a link to in your invite. And definitely contact ourselves if you have any other questions. All right, take care. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.